Hey everyone, this is Anthony from mycodeteacher.com. This tutorial is inspired by a question I've been asked a lot. In the situation where you have a table view and in every single row of the table view there's some kind of control object, so maybe a switch, a button, a slider, and you want to know which row of the table view that control object is coming from. So if you have 100 rows and every single row has a switch on it, and somebody changes the switch from on to off, you need to know what row they're touching. And so there's a really simple, intuitive solution for that, and I'm going to show you how to do that right now. So let's create a new project. I'm going to use navigation base because it comes with a view controller or a table view controller already set up. We'll call it many switches. And we're going to start off by opening our root view controller.m file. And in fact, we should only have to use the root view controller.m file because all of our coding will be in here. So the first thing is we're going to want to create a switch. UISwitch cell switch, we'll call it. And so I'm declaring this up here because in the case that, if you remember that the UI table view reuses cells to conserve memory, it also reuses each cell subview. So we're going to reuse this cell. We don't want to, if we have 100 rows, we don't want 100 switches. It's a lot of unneeded memory being taken up. But at the same time, we still need to know where that switch is coming from. So we're going to declare it up here, and then in the case that we're dealing with a new cell, we're creating a new one, we're going to actually create the switch. And so now we need to give the cell switch a tag and then add it to the content view of our cell so that we can access it later from cells that are being reused. So we'll set the tag to 100. Now we can add that to the content view. And so now let's add 20 rows to our table. Now let's just take a look at what the application looks like right now. So we have 20 cells, each with a switch on the right. But now, if we put on the first switch, you can see as we scroll down, there's another one that's on that was never told to be on. And that's because at that point, the cells are being reused. And we're not conserving the switches that were actually turned on in the background of the app. We're going to do that with an array, actually. Or before we do that, I'm going to show you how to know which row's switch was pressed. So we're going to add an action to this cell, to the cell switch. Add target self selector. Now this is the same as adding an IB, connecting a button to an action. We're just doing it programmatically. Selector change switch. You got to make sure you have that colon there because that's how we're going to know where it came from. It's going to be the sender plugged in there for that parameter, and then UI control event value changed. That'll mean that when the value changes of the switch, so it goes from on to off or off to on, this method will be executed. So now let's implement that method. Change switch. The sender is going to be a UISwitch object, of course. So now, first we need to figure out what table view cell it came from. So let's grab that. UI table view cell, parent cell, equals sender superview superview. So we're calling to superview twice because the first time we're getting the superview of the switch, and that's the content view of the cell. Then we're getting the superview of the content view, and that's the cell itself. Now we can get the index path of that cell by calling to a fantastic method that all UI table views respond to, called index path for cell. And so we can simply pass in the cell object and it'll give us the index path of that cell. So So now let's just make sure this is working. Open up our console here. Let's turn on any cell. Good so far. Excellent. And so you can see it's working. Even when we get all the way down to the rows that are being reused, it still knows which row is being touched. And that's great. So now we can use a little bit more code to save the cells that are on and off in an array. So let's implement the initWithCoder method. Self equals super initWithCoder. And now we're going to need an instance variable, and that's just going to be an array. A mutable array to be exact, because we're going to need to change it at will. We'll call it cell switch states. And so by default, it's going to be a mutable array containing 20 offs. So for int I equals 0, I is less than 20, I plus plus, we're just going to go through a loop. So now when our application first launches, we're going to have an array called cell switch states containing 20 strings that all read off. We're going to use that string to determine if the switch should be on or off. We need to add an else to this if cell equals nil statement. So in the case that the cell is nil and we're creating it for the first time, we also need to create that switch. But in the case that it's not nil and we are reusing a cell, we got to grab that switch that's previously been created and change it to look the way it's supposed to look, whether it should be on or off. So cell switch equals cell.contentView view with tag 100. So it's going to give us that reusable cells switch. And in fact, any view is really reusable. So now, let's get that on-off string. Cell switch states object at index path index path dot row. Okay, and so now if on or off string is equal to string off, cell switch on equals no, else cell switch on equals yes. Okay, and so now we're going to need to save that status in this method when this switch is actually changed. So if sender on cell switch states replace object at index path for cell dot row with object on, else cell switch states replace object at index path for cell dot row with object off. So if the switch was just turned on, we set its position in our cell switch states array to on, otherwise we set that position to off. So now let's give it a try. So far so good. As you can see, whatever rows we actually did turn on remain on, and anything that's off remains off. So now we're still reusing the switch here, but because in this line of code right here we're setting it to on or off, but right before it comes on the screen, it doesn't seem like anything's being reused. It looks exactly the way you would expect it to look. And so it's really not that difficult. The most difficult part is probably understanding the reusing of cells, but all that's done right here, and again, it's really not that difficult. So you simply set up an action to be called when your control button, switch, slider is changed or touched, and then you use these two simple lines of code to determine which cell in the table view they're coming from, and then from there you can do whatever you need. And that's it. So that wraps up this lesson. I'm Anthony from MyCodeTeacher.com. Thanks for watching.